I thought I knew everything about my husband of 35 years. Then, at his funeral, his business partner Marcus pulled me aside and handed me a thick envelope with my name on it. "Dorothy," he whispered, "Robert wanted you to have this only after he was gone." I'm so sorry. When I opened it that night, I discovered my entire marriage had been built on lies. My name is Dorothy Williams, and I'm 67 years old. What I'm about to tell you will shock you to your core, just as it did me. If you're watching this, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I need to know how far this story travels because what happened to me could happen to anyone. The funeral for my husband Robert was everything he would have wanted. Simple, dignified, surrounded by the people who loved him. Or so I thought. We had been married for 35 beautiful years. I met him when I was 32, a single mother working 2 jobs to support my daughter Keisha. Robert was 34, a quiet insurance salesman with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He wasn't flashy or wealthy, but he was steady, reliable. When Keisha was sick, he'd stay up all night with her. When I worried about bills, he'd hold me and say, "We'll figure it out together, Dorothy. We always do." He adopted Keisha when she was 10, gave her his name, walked her down the aisle at her wedding. To the world, we were the perfect middle-class couple. But something was always slightly off, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Robert never talked much about his past. He said his parents died when he was young, that he had no siblings. When I'd ask about his childhood, he'd change the subject. "The past doesn't matter," he'd say. "What matters is our future together." There were other small things too. Phone calls he'd take in another room. Business trips that seemed longer than necessary. A locked filing cabinet in his home office that he said contained boring insurance paperwork. I trusted him completely, so I never questioned any of it. The day Robert died was the worst day of my life. He'd seemed fine that morning, kissing me goodbye before heading to work. Then, at 3 p.m., I got the call no wife ever wants to receive. Heart attack at his office. They tried everything, but it was too late. My world shattered in an instant. But here's where things get strange. At the funeral home, I noticed people I didn't recognize. Well-dressed men and women who nodded respectfully but didn't introduce themselves. When I asked our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who they were, she shrugged. "Probably business associates," she said. But Robert worked for a small insurance company. How many business associates could he have? Then there was Marcus Webb, Robert's supposed business partner. I'd heard Robert mention him over the years, but I'd never met him. He was a tall, silver-haired man, with expensive shoes and a nervous energy that made me uncomfortable. During the service, I caught him watching me intently, like he was waiting for something. After most of the guests had left, Marcus approached me. His hands were shaking, as he pulled out a thick manila envelope from inside his coat. "Dorothy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Robert made me promise to give this to you only after he was gone. I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm even more sorry for what you're about to discover." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, almost too heavy to hold. My name was written across the front in Robert's familiar handwriting, but there was something different about it. More careful, more deliberate, as if he'd taken great care with each letter. "What is this?" I asked Marcus, but he was already walking away. "Read it when you're alone," he called over his shoulder. "And Dorothy, be careful who you trust." That night, I sat in our kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the envelope. Part of me didn't want to open it. Some instinct told me that whatever was inside would change everything forever. But I needed to know. After 35 years of marriage, didn't I deserve to know? Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed. Property deeds for houses I'd never heard of. Insurance policies worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And at the bottom, a letter in Robert's handwriting that made my blood run cold. "My dearest Dorothy," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Marcus has kept his promise. What I'm about to tell you will hurt you deeply, and for that I am truly sorry. But you need to know the truth, especially now that you might be in danger." The letter went on to reveal that Robert wasn't really Robert Williams. His real name was Robert Washington, and for the past 20 years of our marriage, he had been living under a false identity. The insurance company he claimed to work for was a front. His real business was something he called financial consulting for people who needed to move money quietly. I had to stop reading. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely hold the paper. The man I'd shared a bed with for 35 years. The man who'd helped raise my daughter. The man I'd trusted with my life, had been lying to me about everything. But the revelations were just beginning. The letter continued. Dorothy, the house we live in isn't in my name. It's in yours, and it's completely paid for. The bank accounts I've been contributing to for years, they're all in your name. The life insurance policies, you're the sole beneficiary. I did this to protect you, because the life I was living before I met you was dangerous. According to the letter, Robert had been involved in helping wealthy people hide assets from the government. Not exactly illegal, but definitely in a gray area that attracted the wrong kind of attention. When he met me, he'd been looking for a way out. But you don't just walk away from that kind of work. So he'd created a new identity, and slowly funneled all his money into accounts that would keep me secure if anything ever happened to him. The people I worked with, the letter continued, believed I died in a car accident in That's when Robert Washington officially ceased to exist and Robert Williams was born. Our marriage certificate, our mortgage, everything we built together is real, Dorothy. My love for you was always real, but my identity was a lie designed to keep you safe. I felt like I was living in a movie. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be my marriage. But there was more. The letter included detailed instructions about what I needed to do now that he was gone. There's a storage unit in Baltimore, he wrote. Unit 207 at Secure Store on Maple Avenue. The key is taped under the kitchen sink, behind the dish soap. Inside the unit, you'll find cash, more documents, and evidence of everything I'm telling you. But Dorothy, listen carefully. Don't go alone, and don't tell anyone about this except Marcus. Some of my former associates might still be alive, and if they discover I deceived them about my death, they'll come looking for the money.
My head was spinning. I got up and checked under the kitchen sink. Sure enough, there was a small key taped exactly where Robert said it would be. This wasn't some elaborate joke or hallucination. This was real. The next day I called Marcus. I read the letter, I said when he answered. I'm sorry, Dorothy. I tried to convince Robert to tell you the truth while he was alive, but he was terrified of putting you in danger. Is any of it true? The storage unit, the money, the fake identity, all of it, Marcus said sadly. Your husband was one of the most careful men I've ever known. Everything he did was to protect you. But why? Why live such an elaborate lie for 35 years? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because he loved you more than he loved his own life. And because the people he used to work with don't forget and they don't forgive. We agreed to meet at the storage facility the next day. I barely slept that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about every moment of my marriage. Had any of it been real? When Robert told me he loved me, when he cried at Keisha's wedding, when he held me during my mother's funeral, had those emotions been genuine? Or was I married to a man who was essentially an actor playing a role? The storage unit was in a rundown part of Baltimore, the kind of place where you don't ask questions. Marcus was waiting for me in the parking lot, looking even more nervous than he had at the funeral. Are you ready for this? He asked as we walked toward unit. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. The unit was about the size of a small bedroom, and it was packed with file cabinets, boxes, and what looked like enough cash to buy a house. Marcus whistled low under his breath. I knew Robert was careful, but this is incredible. We spent hours going through everything. Bank records dating back 25 years, legal documents for properties in 3 different states, and cash. So much cash that I stopped counting after $200,000. But the most shocking discovery was a photo album hidden at the bottom of one of the boxes. Pictures of Robert that I'd never seen before. From a time when he looked younger, harder, more dangerous. Pictures of him with men in expensive suits, standing next to luxury cars and boats. In one photo, he was shaking hands with a man whose face had been carefully scratched out with a pen. This was his old life, Marcus explained. Before he met you, Robert was very good at making money disappear and reappear in places where the government couldn't find it. He worked for some very wealthy, very dangerous people. And they really think he's dead. As far as they know, Robert Washington died in a car crash in 19... The body was never recovered, which happens sometimes with accidents near water. Robert had planned it perfectly, but as we continued searching through the files, Marcus found something that made his face go white. A recent bank statement showing a large withdrawal made just 2 weeks before Robert's death. This is wrong, Marcus said, his voice tight with worry. Robert never would have touched this account. It was his emergency fund, money he swore he'd never use unless absolutely necessary. What does that mean? Marcus looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes. It means someone found out Robert was alive, It means his death might not have been a heart attack. The thought hit me like a physical blow. Had my husband been murdered? And if so, was I in danger too? We quickly loaded the most important documents and some of the cash into Marcus's car. As we were leaving, I noticed a black sedan that had been parked across the street when we arrived was still there. And the driver seemed to be watching us. "Marcus," I said quietly. "That car—" "I see it," he replied grimly. "Don't look directly at it. Just get in the car normally." As we drove away, the sedan followed us for several miles before finally turning off. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. "Dorothy," Marcus said carefully, "I think you need to disappear for a while. At least until we figure out who might be looking for Robert's money." "Disappear? I can't just disappear. I have a life, a daughter, grandchildren, and you'll have a funeral if the wrong people figure out how much Robert left behind." That night, I stayed at Marcus's house while we tried to make sense of everything. He had a security system, and I discovered a gun collection that suggested he knew how to protect himself. "Tell me the truth, Marcus," I said as we sat in his living room, surrounded by financial documents and evidence of my husband's secret life. Who were these people Robert worked for? Marcus poured himself a glass of whiskey before answering. "The kind of people who don't ask questions about where money comes from, only where it goes. Politicians, business owners, people with more money than they can legally account for. Robert was a specialist at making that money clean. Money laundering, among other things. But Dorothy, you have to understand, your husband wasn't a criminal. He was a service provider. The people he worked for, they were the criminal." Over the next few days, Marcus helped me understand the full scope of Robert's deception. The insurance company where he claimed to work did exist, and he did have an office there, but it was a cover. His real work happened in meetings at expensive restaurants, in private offices, in places where handshakes were worth more than contracts. But the more we learned, the more dangerous our situation became. Marcus discovered that someone had been asking questions about Robert at his old insurance office. Someone had been through our house while I was at the storage unit. Someone was definitely looking for something. Then Marcus found the smoking gun. Hidden in another file was a letter from someone signed only as K that was dated just 1 week before Robert's death. "Robert," the letter read, "we know you're alive. We know about Dorothy. We know about the money. You have 72 hours to make this right, or we make it right for you." The letter was postmarked the day before Robert's heart attack. "They killed him," I whispered, the reality finally sinking in. "My husband was murdered." Marcus nodded grimly. "And now they're coming for what they think you stole from them." But here's what Robert's former associates didn't understand. My husband hadn't stolen anything. Every dollar in those accounts, every piece of property, every investment had been earned legitimately through his consulting work. He'd been paid handsomely for his services, and he'd saved every penny to ensure my future security. The irony was that the people who killed him were chasing money that was legally mine. Robert had been so careful about keeping detailed records specifically to prove that everything he left me was legitimate. "We need to go to the FBI," I told Marcus. "If Robert was murdered, they need to know. Dorothy, these people have connections everywhere. We can't trust anyone until we know who we're dealing with." That's when Marcus showed me the final piece of the puzzle. In Robert's files was a detailed dossier on a man named Kenneth Hartwell, a wealthy businessman who'd been using Robert's services to hide money from his divorce proceedings. According to the file, Hartwell owed Robert $500,000 for services rendered, but had been refusing to pay. The letter signed K suddenly made sense. Hartwell killed Robert because he didn't want to pay what he owed, I said, the pieces finally coming together. And now he wants to eliminate any evidence that the debt existed in the first place. But Kenneth Hartwell had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed that killing Robert would make his problems disappear. What he didn't know was that Robert had been documenting everything, preparing for exactly this scenario. In another file, we found copies of all the financial transactions between Robert and Hartwell, including bank transfers, meeting notes, and even audio recordings of their conversation. Robert had been building a case against Hartwell for months, possibly planning to turn him over to the authorities. "Your husband was smarter than all of them," Marcus said admiringly. "He knew this day would come, and he prepared for it." The next morning, Marcus and I walked into the FBI field office in Baltimore with 3 boxes of evidence. We met with Agent Sarah Collins, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes. Webb,
Agent Collins said after reviewing our story. What you're describing sounds like a sophisticated money laundering operation with connections to multiple felonies. And murder, I added firmly. My husband was killed by Kenneth Hartwell. Agent Collins studied the letter signed K and the financial documents carefully. Mrs. Williams, I have to ask, did you have any knowledge of your husband's activities while he was alive? None, I replied honestly. I thought he sold insurance. Over the next several hours, we went through every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence Robert had left behind. Agent Collins called in specialists to verify the authenticity of the recordings and financial records. Mrs. Williams, she finally said, your husband appears to have been running a legitimate financial consulting business, albeit one that served some questionable clients. More importantly, he seems to have been cooperating with federal investigators for the past 2 years. This was news to both Marcus and me. Cooperating how? I asked. Agent Collins pulled out a file that I hadn't seen before. Robert Washington, also known as Robert Williams, was a federal informant. He'd been providing information about his clients' illegal activities in exchange for immunity and protection. The room started spinning. Not only had my husband been living under a false identity, but he'd also been working with the FBI. And if Kenneth Hartwell had discovered that, Agent Collins, Marcus said quietly, if Hartwell found out Robert was cooperating with the FBI, that would explain the murder. It would also make Mrs. Williams a target, Agent Collins replied grimly. If Hartwell believes she has access to information that could implicate him, he won't stop until he eliminates that threat. Within hours, I was in federal protective custody. Agent Collins explained that Kenneth Hartwell was already under investigation for multiple financial crimes, and Robert's evidence was exactly what they needed to build a case against him. But the investigation revealed even more shocking truth. Robert hadn't just been hiding money for rich people, he'd been documenting their crimes, building cases that would eventually bring down an entire network of corruption. Your husband was a hero, Agent Collins told me during one of our briefings. His information has already led to the arrest of 12 people, including 2 sitting judges and a state senator. The final revelation came when Agent Collins showed me Robert's real FBI. He'd started cooperating with federal investigators 5 years after we were married, when he realized that the people he was working for were involved in more than just tax avoidance. They were funding criminal organizations, laundering money for drug dealers, and corrupting public officials. Robert could have disappeared again, Agent Collins explained. He could have taken his money and vanished, but he chose to stay and gather evidence because he knew it was the right thing to do, and because leaving would have meant abandoning you, Marcus added softly. Kenneth Hartwell was arrested 6 weeks later. When agents searched his home, they found detailed plans to kill both Marcus and me, along with evidence linking him to Robert's murder. Apparently, he'd been bribing Robert's doctor to provide him with information about Robert's health, looking for the perfect opportunity to kill him in a way that would look natural. The day Robert had his heart attack, he'd actually been poisoned with a drug that mimics the symptoms of cardiac arrest. The autopsy that was never performed would have revealed this, but Hartwell had paid the coroner to declare the death natural causes without a full examination. The trial was a media sensation. Kenneth Hartwell, prominent businessman and pillar of the community, exposed as a murderer and money launderer. The evidence Robert had gathered didn't just convict Hartwell, it brought down his entire organization. During the trial, I learned even more about the man I'd been married to for 35 years. Former clients testified about Robert's professionalism and integrity. FBI agents described him as one of their most valuable assets. Even criminals he'd helped convict spoke about his fairness and honesty. Robert Williams never lied to any of us about what he was doing, one former client testified. He told us up front that he was documenting everything, and that he'd turn over any evidence of serious crimes to the authorities. We paid him anyway because he was the best at what he did. The defense tried to paint Robert as a criminal who'd gotten what he deserved, but the evidence was overwhelming. Robert had been trying to bring criminals to justice, and he'd been murdered for it. Kenneth Hartwell was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. 7 of his associates received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. The corruption network Robert had helped expose resulted in the largest federal investigation in the state's history. But the most important revelation came in Robert's final message to me, a letter that Agent Collins had been holding until after the trial. My dearest Dorothy, it read, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and the truth has finally come out. I need you to know that every single day of our marriage was real. Yes, I lied about my name and my work, but I never lied about loving you.
You made me want to be a better man, and everything I did, including the dangerous work with the FBI, was to ensure that you'd be safe and secure when I was gone. The letter went on to explain that Robert had been planning to reveal everything to me on our 40th wedding anniversary. He'd been working with the FBI to wrap up the investigation so that he could finally tell me the truth without putting me in danger. I know this must hurt, the letter continued, but I need you to understand that Robert Williams was more real than Robert Washington ever was. The man who held you every night, who cried at Keisha's graduation, who worried about your health and your happiness, that man was completely genuine. The only thing fake about our marriage was my last name. Today, 2 years after Robert's death and 1 year after Hartwell's conviction, I'm finally able to tell this story publicly. The FBI has confirmed that all threats to my safety have been eliminated, and I'm no longer in protective custody. I've used some of the money Robert left me to start a foundation that helps families of federal informants who have been killed in the line of duty. It turns out there are more of us than you might think, families who discover after the fact that their loved ones died as heroes. Keisha has forgiven Robert for his deceptions. He was still the same dad who taught me to drive and walked me down the aisle, she says. The rest was just details. I've also become close friends with Marcus, who has helped me understand the full scope of what Robert accomplished. The corruption network they brought down had been operating for over 20 years, stealing millions of dollars from taxpayers and perverting justice at every level. Your husband saved this state from decades more corruption, Marcus told me recently. He paid the ultimate price, but he made sure the truth would come out. The hardest part hasn't been learning that my marriage was built on lies. The hardest part has been learning that it wasn't. Robert's love for me was real, even if his identity was. His commitment to our family was genuine, even if his job description was fiction. I still live in the house we shared, the house that Robert made sure was paid for and put in my name. I still wear my wedding ring because the promises Robert made to me were kept, even if I didn't understand how at the time. And sometimes, late at night, I can almost hear him whispering the words he used to say when I worried about money. We'll figure it out together, Dorothy. We always do. He was right, even about that. We did figure it out together, even after death separated us. The envelope Marcus gave me at Robert's funeral didn't just contain documents and money. It contained the truth about a love so deep that it inspired a man to spend 20 years of his life gathering evidence against criminals, knowing that it would probably get him killed. My husband wasn't the simple insurance salesman I thought I'd marry. He was a federal informant who helped bring down one of the largest corruption networks in state history. He was a hero who died protecting not just me, but every honest citizen in our state. And he was the love of my life, even if I didn't know his real name until after he was gone. Did you like my story? Let me know in the comments what you think and tell me where you're watching from. If this story touched you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more true life stories. And if you want to support me in sharing these important stories, you can send a super thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the people we love have secrets, but that doesn't mean their love isn't real. See you in the next